Hi there, it's Analytical Chick.
Oh, well, people need to be awake and they need to be aware. They need to stand up.
I've been wanting to talk about my personal experiences with fake news. Anyway, so let's see. Um, One of my first experiences that I had was like maybe 10 years ago. I started to notice clickbait, and I noticed that titles would raise questions that would not be answered in the article. And so I noticed that. And then also at one point, I remember there was an article in particular that I was just really annoyed that it didn't have any information, and so that particular time I went looking. I was like, oh, let me just Google some key items from this, article and see if I can find other articles on the same topic. So I did that, and I literally kept finding the exact same article with different titles. And I was like, what the heck? But it turned out I noticed they all said either AP reports or, you know, shared byline with AP, Associated Press. So that's when I sort of discovered that the Associated Press was like writing everybody's articles, and they're just like they pay a fee to the Associated Press. And this is how also the mainstream media, the Associated Press, kind of has control, because it's much cheaper for them to do this. They do all the real reporting, if you want to call it that, and then they either reprint the exact same thing. Sometimes they take the Associated Press article and they kind of rewrite it. A lot of other times they just basically reprint it with no changes. I think maybe they changed the headline. I also noticed that articles weren't answering questions like I was trained in elementary school that when you write an article, you always answer the questions who, what, where, when, why, and how. And I mean, this was like who, what, where, we had to recite this, we had to know this, we got tested on this, who, what, where, when, why, and how. When I was back in college, like 10 years ago, the students I was in school with had no idea what I was talking about when I mentioned this to them. They didn't know about like intro paragraphs and conclusion paragraphs. So that's kind of like a related note. I mean, if they're not knowing how to write properly, they're also not able to recognize that they are now that the material that's being pushed out at them is not properly written according to the standards that held for years and years and years. Like, my grandmother was raised under a lot of these standards. She complained when I was growing up that school was supposed to be reading, writing, and arithmetic, and that it was more than that, but it wasn't too much more when I was not like now. I mean, it was more. I remember at one point we had like feelings workshops and stuff like that, which I mean now I know is like pinko kami bull donkey. Um anyway, so I also wanted to go back to one of my first experiences with fake news. This was all the way back when I was in high school. So we're talking early 90s. So if you follow my channel, you know that I wasn't always Jewish, that at one point I was secular, and then before that, I wasn't raised as a Christian, but I had started going to a youth group when I was in like 5th or 6th grade. So I was a Christian like middle school and high school. Like, I went to youth group for like a year before I became a Christian, like actually practicing. I was just going to youth group at first. But anyway, so when I was in high school, I was a Christian, and the church that I went to when I was in high school was a very, very, like, hardcore Baptist church. I don't think they were with any of the conferences. And I remember the pastor telling this story one time, and it ties into all the activism that I do now today. I guess I'm a little bit of an online warrior, but, you know. And he was telling us how they were protesting Children's Hospital where I grew up because they were performing abortions. So one of the news medias sat down with him and they interviewed him, and he said he gave like an hour and a half of an interview, and they took like a line or two and they kind of took it out of context, and it didn't get across the point that he wanted to get across. And he was telling us the story, and he said, so I learned my lesson. So the next time they went to protest something like this, I maybe it was the second time, they were definitely the second time protesting Children's Hospital. And so they sat down with him to interview him, and he had learned his lesson from the first incident, and that kind of ties into all of the distortions and the kind of garbage and slyness that the mainstream media, like, you look at how people are learning to record their interviews now and stuff like that. Anyway, so when he went into the second interview and they were like, oh, what about all the good that Children's Hospital does? And he had a little trick up his sleeve. Every question they asked, he just responded. We are here today because Children's Hospital is performing abortions. We are here today. Every single question. We are here today because Children's Hospital is performing abortions. Every single question, he answered that. Well, he didn't end up with an hour and a half interview this time. They interviewed him, I don't know, maybe 3-4 questions. And they finally, like, they turned off the cameras and they were like, is that what you're going to answer for every single question we ask? And he was like, yeah, pretty much. Or something to that effect. And so they didn't use him at all for the segment, but he said that it was good because at least he didn't waste his time sitting there interviewing for like an hour and a half and being taken out of context. So I thought that was particularly applicable. Ugh, I can't talk. I'm still a little stuffed up. That's why I haven't been making a lot of videos. I've been super stuffed up with a sinus cold. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about fake news, and I wanted to cover like the rise of clickbait that I noticed, which I did cover in this video, and I also thought that story was a quite interesting story and fit. You know, and it's funny that the story is from back in the early 90s because it kind of shows that really actually the media has been doing this for a long time. And it also ties into the fact that, you know, the left always acts like Donald Trump, like, said fake news and then all of a sudden people jumped on board with him. But in actuality, people really did notice that the media was fake news before that. So besides this pastor who told the story in church, just several times, even before Trump came on the election, you know, announced for election and came on the scene with his, you know, fake news, I did notice that people were complaining a lot in the comments about how the titles were very clickbaity and how the articles were not answering questions. And people would just be like, well, if you don't like it, just get, you know, like, and these were probably young people who were, like, giving a snotty response. And it was probably people like my own age and older who were complaining in the comments. And then, you know, eventually you saw the comments started disappearing. And that happened really before Trump hit the scene. And why did the comments disappear? The comments disappeared because people were criticizing the media for blatantly lying and for not giving a decent amount of information, not answering the who, what, where, when, why, and how. I actually saw people who use that terminology on articles where I'd be reading the article and I would think this, and I would scroll down to the comments and other people would be saying the same thing. Where's the who, what, where, why, and how? You need to have that. Like, what are you doing? Like, did you fail English or something? You know, and you'd have these people who, like, went to Harvard and they'd be misspelling stuff and they'd be leaving this stuff out. And people were noticing before Trump, you know, put this idea on the scene. And so, yeah, that's, just something I've been wanting to cover. Alright, everybody. Thanks for stopping by my channel, and I'll see you all next time.
People need to be awake and they need people need to be awake and they need to be aware. They need to stand up against the stuff. People need to be awake. People need to be awake and they need to be aware. They need to stand up against this stuff.
And it's so politically engaged. And it's so politically engaged.